Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Dempsey, and on behalf of the Department of Neurosurgery, giving update on COVID. I think this is a particularly important time because there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of optimism. If you're a careful follower of the world scene, there's concern still about the pandemic. And I think importantly, there's a lot of uncertainty about things like masks or no masks, vaccines, mutations, efficacy, and the most important question, when is this all over? So I think to try to answer that, we're going to try to make some sense out of this. And I call this talk COVID-19 Too Soon for an Endgame. Now, if you know anything about chess, the endgame is the time during the game when the master begins to see that they're winning, begins to develop a strategy to end the game, to win. You may have more pieces or more power, or maybe you have a vaccine that's effective against it. Then you have to have a strategy to close out the game successfully. The problem, of course, is that the naive player may try to do the finish too soon and present themselves as vulnerable to attack. And so starting your endgame too soon could be a mistake. I think that's the lesson that I'm trying to put across, is that there's been so much optimism in the last week, really, that people are kind of losing track of how we got to a good place, how the rest of the world is not in a good place, and what we're going to have to do to think to try to be safe, keep our families safe, open up our society in a sensible way. And that's really the first principle. This is a major pandemic. We now know that the numbers are vastly underreported, but to have 164 million confirmed cases of anything in the world is spectacularly bad. 3.5 million confirmed deaths, and we know from what's going on in India that the numbers are probably underreported by 2/3, some say by 10 times. But the United States, whose numbers are pretty reliable, we're inching towards 600,000 dead from a disease that really is kind of descended from the common cold. It tells you what certain changes and mutations can do that have made this one particularly easy to spread and at a high, not world record, but high rate of morbidity, mortality. The effects in Wisconsin and Dane County are still not as terrible as they are in other parts of the world and the country. But there's a lot to be learned from what's going on here. And I think the most important things to look at are some of these figures, which are from today. And if you look at them, there's a couple of important things. We still, in the state of Wisconsin, see 419 cases on average per day this past week. And that really puts us about the same place as we were last year when we were in a panic about this disease, because there's so much was unknown. We did not have a vaccine at that time. So all our efforts and all our vaccinations have taken our state back to where we were when we were impending doom. And what happened, interestingly enough, in the fall was a massive surge of cases in our state. And we see this massive surge of cases happening throughout the world. It seems to be a hotspot disease. And when your spot is hot, you're in a lot of trouble. And the way to avoid being a hotspot appears to be vaccinate. Isolation, masking, hand washing are very important. There's no question about it. But as far as eliminating this disease, we probably need some more help than just that. And that's what the vaccinations seem to be. Our own numbers, we've gone from a panic when we used to have 456 people per day in the ICU, but still have 81. This is for the state. That's a lot. And the case numbers are actually slightly up in the last few days. The deaths are not, but they're still 8 per day. And this is our rate of vaccination. So the rise of vaccinations, especially vaccinating the highly vulnerable, elderly, nursing home patients, caused our death rates to plummet, but not go away. And importantly, though we achieved as high as 90% in the highly vulnerable people being vaccinated, the rest of the population that will spread the disease and will repopulate it to another hotspot are not vaccinating at those rates. As a matter of fact, the rates for the population are falling even in these past months. And that has to do with resistance to be vaccinated, political yearnings, fear, uncertainty, or misinformation. All are possible. So it's kind of important to sort of get an idea of where we are, what's the state of mutations, what's the state of vaccines, because the vaccine story is really remarkable. Right now in Wisconsin, which has gone from being slow to being extremely good on vaccinating people, we have about 41% vaccinated and almost 50% have received one dose. Nationally, it's more like a little more than a third that are fully vaccinated, which means 2/3 are still susceptible. That's very important because if you look at what's happened in the world, I think India is very, very much a test case for us. India declared victory just really about a month ago. They said our rates are so low and it's all the things we've been doing. We open up our economy, we get back to it. But they had vaccinated less than 1% of their population. And so they were a large number of people that were highly vulnerable. And I point out half of our country, or maybe almost 60%, are highly vulnerable. And that's plenty for more hotspots and more trouble. So the at-risk is real. The vaccines that India had are not as effective as the ones we have, and they were not widely spread. So now when they became a hot spot, people massed together, they've had incredible rates, which I believe are 3 to 10 times higher than what are being reported when I talk to physicians, etc., as I have throughout the world. And the rates in Bolivia, in Paraguay, in Brazil, in Venezuela are extremely high. Ones in the United States are going well, but this is not a time to rest on our laurels. So what do we know about the mutations which are being developed in India right now? Very little. Very little. We know that people are still getting sick with the Indian vaccine, but there may be a reason for that. We need to understand how vaccines work and what is out there, because the story about vaccines, especially in the US, believe me, is Nobel Prize quality, one of the greatest stories in medical history, that in 4 to 5 months we turned around a vaccine that may be in the high 90s of efficacy. These are the 2 RNA vaccines that you hear about as Pfizer and Moderna. And I'll tell a little bit of the story of that. The other vaccines throughout the world are more of our standard ones, which usually are only 2/3 to 75% effective, but that's enough to protect the population if you get everybody vaccinated. If you only get 40%, those aren't going to work as well. If you only get 1%, you're in severe trouble. So what do we know about vaccines? Well, first off, amazing things happened in the past year. Again, the science. In January of 2020, we had only known about this unique virus for about a month. The Chinese released the full genome. They had it sequenced that quickly. And throughout the world, people went to work trying to find vaccines. The first was the very classic standard vaccine, where you find a protein that virus makes, and you make a virus in a moth, actually, to make a lot of that protein. You take the protein, purify it, and you inject it into people, and they make antibodies to that. That's a very standard or classic vaccine. It's not 100% effective. It has side effects, etc. But there are 2 out there that are of that type, and one of them is being used in India. The next that came up was the one out of Oxford. That was, they took a viral vector in this case, like an adenovirus, a common cold virus, and they put uh, genetic material from the virus in that so that it would infect you, not make you very sick, and then you would be immune not only to that not very sick vector virus, but also the material that it carried. That's what the AstraZeneca is. That's what the Sputnik is. That's what the J&J is. And those are about 75% effective at best. So when the New York Yankees vaccinated their entire team with J&J, they should expect that about a quarter of them could get the disease. And indeed they did. They've got 8 players or team members now that have the coronavirus. But because they're all together and they all let down their guard and they all got it. Fortunately, the vaccination did keep them from being seriously ill. And that is a benefit, but it doesn't completely protect you. The next was the very oldest vaccine. This is what the Chinese are doing. They take the virus and they try to inactivate it, and they give you that virus. Hope they inactivated it. You get immune to that, and you are protected. This goes back to, to smallpox, really. And that is the Chinese vector. It's not as effective because the one that is remarkably Nobel Prize quality more effective are these two RNA, messenger RNA vaccines, which we know as Moderna and Pfizer. They were advertised as being 95% effective in their trials. And yet, when we look at the places that have been vaccinated with those two, we find two things. Thus far, they seem to defeat the variations which are propping up in Africa and India thus far, and their efficacy in fully vaccinated people is astounding, perhaps as high as 99%, not 100%, but very high. So when that information became clear in the US, to our falling rates of deaths and hospitalization, the CDC did a remarkable thing. And I truly think what the CDC was trying to do a week ago was trying to increase vaccinations by saying, if you're fully vaccinated and you hang around people that are fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear masks. You don't even have to distance because you're safe. But that was misinterpreted by people who had no intention of getting vaccinated as a get out of jail free card, that they would not need to get their shots or the vaccine because this pandemic is over, which of course it is not. With only 40% of the people in the country protected, this would not be a smart way to go. And remember, unprotected includes the children. So we have a responsibility to protect them. The fine print of that release that said you can take your mask off was, unless you're working around children or in a hospital or in a nursing home or a daycare, because there are susceptible people there and it could be spread. So where are we at this point? Well, we know that the vaccines that are in the United States are very safe. We know that the Pfizer and Moderna are probably 90 plus effective and the J&J 75 plus effective. And the fact that there are different vaccines is probably good, because if something mutates like a bacteria and you have two antibiotics, it becomes resistant to one but not the other. Well, that's where we as a people may benefit from these multiple vaccines. But you have to understand this is why whole countries are at great risk until we get them vaccinated. And this is no time to send mixed messages about the importance of that. So where does it leave us? Well, it leaves us with India in trouble because there's a massive civilization. It leaves us with part of the problem with a misinterpretation for the past year about how this is spread. When you look at those graphs of the spread and you see, it did happen more when people were inside. And the CDC interpreted that as saying if you're outside, you're good to go. That may even be true, but what it means is this thing has to aerosolize. We were told that this particular virus only spread by droplets. You'd cough, it'd fall on the ground, your hand would touch it, the hand would carry it to the face, and you'd get it that way. That's how polio spreads. But they said that this did not aerosolize the way measles and TB do. And really, it wasn't until just really this past month that the physicists finally proved that this virus can aerosolize. That means it can hang in the air. That's why a crowded restaurant, the virus may hang in the air till you walk through it. That's why you need to mask on planes and subways and indoor spaces that people may or may not be vaccinated are walking through. And so that's kind of an important message. And so when I'm around children, I wear a mask. When I'm around that small group of people that I know well and I know they're careful and vaccinated, yes, I can take my mask down or off. But this is kind of where we are. And if we really want to protect us and the people we care about, we need to vaccinate children. And we need to vaccinate our co-people in other countries. And regarding children, we have to very carefully do safety tests because we can't assume something is safe for them because they react differently to infections. That's why they have been less sick. But to the vaccination, we do not want to overwhelm them. So what they're really trying to figure out is what's the proper dose for a child. And we think we have it figured out down to age 12 and are vaccinating 12 and above now. And I endorse that. And I believe in the next months to the end of the year, we'll figure out children down to age 2. And that'll be an important step to really becoming more and more safe. But the important thing that comes from this is that we need to understand that when the CDC, you didn't have to wear a mask if you were totally vaccinated and hung around with people who are totally vaccinated, does not mean it's over. It will not be over until we get enough people vaccinated or this dies off. You'll see that by cases of its own accord. So where do we stand? Well, the nature of laws in this country are such that people wish to make their own decisions. So all we can do is tell them that if you have been totally vaccinated in the United States, you're probably safe to be with other people who are vaccinated. If you're in a situation where that's uncertain, you should isolate. And because this does aerosolize, masks are a very effective way to do that if you have to come close to people. Outdoors is much safer, much safer. And that's probably, again, has to do with the way it's spread. And it's rather hard to get this outdoors. So there are more liberal outdoor rules going into effect, which are calculated to allow people to go to sporting events and restaurants. That's really outdoor restaurants, concerts, etc. That's really what that's about. But you use your common sense about it because we are winning. We have two of the most powerful tools in the history of medicine, these vaccinations, and we have to allow them to be rolled out, not only in this country, but everywhere else. We can't let our guard down, even though we are beginning to open up and become no more normal. So be careful is my main lesson, and be complete. And if you can do anything, try to encourage people you care about, which should be everyone, to get vaccinated. That's when they have this free opportunity here, and try to lobby that we export vaccines throughout the world because they'll be badly needed if we want to end this. So that's where we are. It is optimistic, but it's not the end game yet. It is important for us to maintain our vigilance while we do open up with safety. Thanks very much.